I love your T-shirt, by the way.
For sale. $15.
Yeah, and it basically describes the UN's blatant disregard for Trudeau's antics as a world leader and not wanting to represent the globalist crass society that they call the UN.
Yeah, well, they don't even want them, so.
In a time when idiocracy has arrived and politicians do nothing but lie and fight over power, two men rose up from the ashes with a message to unite everyone.
Mind your damn business. All right, guys, welcome to episode 5. Yeah, episode 5 of Mind Your Damn Business. As always, we have Marco Rossi. My name's Greg. And tonight's guest, former deputy leader of the Ontario Libertarian Party, Mark Snow. How's it going, Mark?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, no problem. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Just a little background. Me and Mark and Marco, we've kind of known each other for a couple of years through the Libertarian Party. So, I don't know, we just kind of became friends and communicate once in a while back and forth. And so here we are. What are you up to now, Mark?
Getting ready for a big move to the country to become self-sufficient. Still pushing on the liberty thing, but not, or the liberty movement, but not from a active executive anymore. I'm going to advocate as much as I can. I stepped down because at the end of the day, I wasn't putting the effort into it that I really wanted to put into it with everything going on. And Keith and I had a talk, and it was best for me to step down just to let someone who's ready to run and go fuller, harder than what I was. And I don't regret it. I believe in liberty, and I believe that it should move forward. And if I wasn't doing more than what I could, then I should step down, and that's what I did. No ill feelings. I love Keith. I love there's no loss there in the sense. There's only gaining.
Yeah.
Where do you think that party's headed right now?
Of course, I'm going to be careful. I think with everything that's been going on in the last 4 months, I think there's been a great awakening of the Canadian people to understanding about their rights. I really believe there's been a awakening of people understanding that their freedom is being taken away, that they're being restricted by government for what? A virus that is 98.888%, 100% recovery from. So is there an opportunity for us to be able to talk libertarian ideas, talk more freedoms, and talk about government control? Yeah, I believe that if we could build that mass, then we could actually have these conversations and actually grow the party. So,
what do you think the party needs to do to maybe gain a little more structure, a little more foothold, at least within Ontario?
Well, there's 1,000 things we could do, but if we don't get the traction, like we ran 116 candidates last election, you'd think that would be a news item. And it's just so hard to break through the media without the millions of dollars. And even if we had the millions of dollars, I don't think they'd actually play us, because the way media is controlled, there's either a left camp or a right camp, and there's a left media and a right media. And the medias pander to whatever market will buy their product. So there really is no left-leaning papers. There's left-leaning markets and right-leaning markets. And that's what media does, is they pander to those demographics. So it's hard to break through that. Even if we had $1 million, we'd have to buy advertising in the middle of hockey games. And then even then people would go, what? Why would I want to do that? So it's hard. You really have to restrict people's freedoms to understand what they don't have. And we're here.
Well, we had a conversation with Tim Moen, some of you know as well. We were talking about Elizabeth May and the Green Party, and one way they broke through was chaining themselves to fences and protests and getting themselves in the news and forcing themselves in the news, which didn't really cost them any money. They were just advocating and being advocates for their cause, which eventually got them notoriety. It took them a lot of years, but it eventually got them a seat or two. I think they actually won a lot of seats in a couple provinces.
Yeah, they did in a couple provinces, but still only one on the federal level.
Yeah, but it all starts provincially. You know what I mean? That's how if your party starts growing provincially, then it's going to start growing. And they like what you're doing, then it's going to grow federally as well.
So the Green movement is completely tied to the Agenda 21 and the background of grassroots, community-based activism, which is what we would need for libertarians to be able to do. But it's hard to even compete on that. You know as well, and Marco, you know as well, that we fought the whole election just to get our candidates up on the stage, running almost a complete full slate. We had no control over those venues, and it was very disheartening. As I'm a former soldier, and I was absolutely flabbergasted that there was no protections for democracy to have. I don't care if you're a communist and you want to get up there. You got a full slate and you got a ticket, then you should have a right to speak. So
yeah, and a lot of it, it has to be with convincing the average person. I know that when I ran for Freedom Party, which has some similarities to the Libertarians, it was a real uphill battle, because a lot of times it's even the voters who like you that'll end up sabotaging you, because I could, but I don't think you could win. And it's this,
maybe next time.
Yeah, maybe next time, and the next time happens, and then it's no, I can't. It's the same excuse, and it's this self-sabotaging idea, and I don't know how we're going to be able to break free of those perverse incentives until we hit rock bottom, or even if we changed our voting system, there's no guarantee that the Libertarians are going to win either. So it's
therein lies the problem, is that will it be too late till we have a Venezuela type restrictive lifestyle on Canadians, and then it's too late? You can always vote your way into communism, but you have to shoot your way out of it.
Yes,
is the old saying. Now, I do believe the pandemic has really awakened people up to loss of freedoms and basic understandings of freedom, from the bylaw officers giving people tickets while walking through parks. I mean, I thought I had the right to be free. That's what people talk about, and it has done a good thing. Now, if we capitalize on it, none of the conservatives, the liberals, they're not capitalizing on it. They're supporting it. They're encouraging it. They're saying stay home.
Yeah.
Keith and them have done their best down in Toronto and a couple times here in Ottawa, and it will make a difference. But you look at the vitriol that comes through the social media when they cover something like this.
Yeah,
the sheep are well asleep.
Yeah.
Well, I think one thing it has done is has shown a lot of people the hypocrisy of the media and the government. When the media says, "Oh, we don't consider the BLM protests to be a health hazard towards COVID," but don't get that confused with the other lockdown protests. We don't like that at all. So like that's basically their exact words. And people are like, wait a minute. Well, now we see what's going on here. You're making it obviously a political agenda. And I think that definitely helps us.
Absolutely. That was a very, very real feeling and sentiment through Canadian people about Black Lives Matter movement here in Ottawa in particular, and how Trudeau finally emerged from the shelter of the Rideau Cottage, where he hasn't left for the people of Canada, and stood in the middle of the street in Rideau Street with an $11,000 watch, taking a knee. And he hasn't come out of his house. He hasn't actually gone to Parliament. He hasn't done anything. But all of a sudden, there's a great big demographic that I can pander to. So I'm going to walk out in the middle of a crowd and take a knee.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
People see the hypocrisy in that. People felt it really here in Ottawa and across the country.
It definitely forced him back into Parliament, because you can't be going out with 1,000 people and not going back to work.
Mm-hmm.
Right? What are we paying you for?
So, this tracking app that they have out today, I was listening to on CFRA, the local news talk radio, and they were talking about how it doesn't do anything, but it does a lot in the background, but it doesn't identify you personally. This is as far as I'm concerned, the agenda that's going to push the second wave and lock down even further for Trudeau to virtue signal to say, yeah, we need to support more people served by another 2 months. I mean, did see a report about 3 hours ago that Ford said that they're thinking about to the end of July now for the lockdown. It was only supposed to be to the 18th of June today. So I don't know if that's real or not.
Yeah. I saw that today as well. July 19th is what I saw.
I saw July 15th.
Yeah, somewhere middle July. But why are they prolonging it when we clearly can see the numbers are going down? And we can clearly see the statistics that this isn't a deadly disease like we once thought. And I don't know. There's definitely people are definitely seeing an agenda behind this.
So what we have to talk about is what are the actual national stats? Stats Canada from 2018 said that 276,000 people died of one of two causes: falls or heart attacks. Or falls or cancer. Sorry, I wrote a post on that the other day. So if we say that over half those people, that's 140,000 people. How many people have died in Canada right now? And really, this is what it's about. It's about pushing an agenda, whether it's real or not. But the truth of the matter is the virus is not the problem. It's the state's failure to plan and be prepared with ventilators that has caused the state to lock down society for the failure of our public health care system. And that's really what they're protecting us from, so we don't have the images of doctors in Italy having to make decision on who lives or dies. It isn't about protecting the people, because we know for a fact that it's a 98.888%, 100% recovery rate with no medical intervention whatsoever. Intervention whatsoever. So in that sense there, what is the purpose of it? It's to protect the social safety net and protect the political lives of those who'd be held accountable for it. And that's really what it's about. Ford isn't doing good for the people. Ford is actually protecting his political position so nobody can look at him and point a finger right in his face and go, it's your fault, and you won't get elected because of it. It's fear of losing power.
Right. But if 500,000 people showed up on Queen's Park, I bet he'd change his tune and start lifting regulations, because politicians, they sway with whichever they think the people are going to vote.
Yeah.
So he thinks more people are going to start voting the other way, or he's going to lose his spot because we're not ending the lockdowns. He'll quickly change his tune. He doesn't care about you or me. He cares about his spot. So
No, he cares about the GTA where he's got the rest of the province blue. So therefore he has to pander to the vote base within the 905 GTA area to ensure that he keeps that little narrow margin that was around his majority win, was all centered around the outside of the 905. And these are the people that are the leftists that he's got to appease by doing this.
And I find it interesting because if you look at, slowly, like for example in Ottawa, right, we're slowly getting things open with some restrictions, but if you notice the articles lately, it would say except for Toronto, they're still in. That to me says, right, that he's trying to keep people dependent on him, so that eventually they're going to go, please, Mr. Ford, please, or even John Tory, please, right? And you're going to be basically at their mercy, hoping that they'll finally crack. So it's like you said, you create a dependency there.
You create it so bad that people need to have permission from the government.
That's we're there. It's crazy.
Like if they were so afraid of an outbreak in Toronto, and that's why Toronto's still on lockdown, they would have Toronto barricaded off. But as it stands right now, people from Toronto can still come here, come to Ottawa, go anywhere. So it's really not protecting anybody, because people who are going to travel just to get out, because they've been locked up for 3 months. People will drive that 2 hours to Sandbanks Provincial Beach to go to the beach.
Don't give them any ideas though.
I don't think don't think they need the idea. Like
barbed wire chain link fence, you know.
So in
Right,
Eastern
right.
Ontario, we had over 700 respirators ready at the start of the pandemic. The count for percentage of people on respirators never achieved more than 20% of the 700 that we had.
Mhm.
Think
Wow.
about that. It never got to the point where we had more than 20% of the 700 respirators in use in Eastern Ontario.
Well, that's
And
happening everywhere.
we've killed an economy for this.
That's we should
Look at
isolate that clip. That's a scary stat.
look at Saskatchewan. They're building field hospitals, and they only have 19 active cases.
Yeah.
And they're building field hospitals right now.
Someone
Not
got a
3 months
contract.
ago. Not 3 months ago. Right now, they're building field hospitals in Saskatoon and
Someone got a
Regina.
contract to build that.
Yeah.
100%.
Emergency spending powers under the Emergency Measures Act by provincial governments.
Yeah.
Someone got a contract to build that. Not because of need. It was because of pandering to government.
Oh, sure.
That's correct. But that's how government works and lobbyists works. It's there's no crisis goes to waste.
And no good
It's just-
crisis goes to waste. Yeah. That's unfortunately sad for our rights.
It's very true. Like, and once government takes power, they don't usually like to give it back very easy, I find.
So there's a guy on YouTube. I wish I could remember what his name is. He's a Canadian. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of First Amendment auditors in the States. Have you heard of them?
First
No.
Amendment auditors, no.
Geez, I thought everybody knew about them. So he's a guy who goes around and videotapes the police, basically, and they use
have
their
seen them.
Yeah.
excuse me. So we got a guy in Canada in BC. It's called News Now Victoria, and he's got a great video. I've given speeches on free speech and what our charter rights grant us to in Section 318 and 319. He goes into the whole public mischief, disturbing the peace. And he basically tells people what our rights are in the guise of how to do this in Canada safely, legally, without being arrested. And it's really interesting because he refers to a lot of case law, public mischief, and disturbing the peace. And he goes through what our rights are, which we don't have rights. We have fundamental freedoms. And Section 1 of the Charter says fundamental freedom. Section 2 of the Charter, or Section 2B of the Charter, says freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and other media communications. And it's a really interesting video to watch because I thought I knew a lot about the law, a lot about our rights, and a lot about our abilities to be able to actively protest and take part in these. But I learned so much just from his video on how to do this and what terminology you have to use to protect your rights. And it's really a great understanding of we don't have rights and we have freedoms, fundamental freedoms. They're not rights. And the word reasonable, and you've heard me speak of this before, the word reasonable is put in a lot of these. And reasonable is a very, very terrible word in what's constitution or constitutes law because it gives sole discretion of the officer to determine what's reasonable or the court to determine what's reasonable.
Yeah.
But right off the bat, reasonability is the object in which they arrest you for because the police officer might think it's unreasonable what you're doing. You're arrested, and then you now have to prove to the court that it's reasonable. So that's not rights. That's serfdom and slavery based on authority.
Yeah.
And that's why they call it fundamental freedoms because it's not rights.
Well, that's the thing, right? I'm reading Section 1 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It says it has reasonable limits, basically on what like the government can really allow when it comes to
freedom.
Yeah, limiting an individual's charter rights. I mean, it's crazy.
You don't have rights. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is a fake document. We don't have rights. We have reasonable freedoms subject to government determinations.
What's the thing? And it's contradictory because you look further down and it talks about collective rights. Well, there's no such thing, right? Collective is made up of individuals. If you don't have individual rights, you've got nothing but a state, basically a totalitarian state. right? Because you're basically just kind of at the whim of the government, and they can kind of use you and abuse you as they see fit.
And change the rules as they go without
Right.
rights.
Well, that's it. I mean, all the unwritten conventions seem to go out the window now. I mean, they're there, like they're still like written, but I think it means like unwritten in the sense that like each piece that we've inherited from the British isn't like the one like sole binding thing. It's like a bunch of different things. And then we had now it's like we have a written, like we had the Bill of Rights that Diefenbaker brought in, but it didn't have any teeth. And then Trudeau brings in the Charter, Pierre Trudeau, and that started having teeth, right? And it just completely revolutionized
Actually,
how we looked at it.
British common law, the Magna Carta, and the Constitution of 1867, and the Westminster Agreement in 1933 actually provided us with property rights, land rights. There's always been a held back in a monarchy that the government owns the land. You could have property rights, but you didn't own the mineral resources. The new Constitution and the Bill of Rights in 1967 still allowed you to defend your property, still gave you property rights. It was the porting of all 3 or 4 of those documents as they sold it in 1984. And I was there. I was alive and a young man at that time, really watching with great interest, thinking this was the greatest thing in the world to do this. But in reality, the Charter and the way that it was wrote, and the Constitution and the way that it was wrote, actually granted even more access of the OICs through the PMO's office, through the Charter and through the Constitution. And the detractors of the day, if you go back and just Google the stories from the detractors of the Constitution, you'll see all the warnings that they were saying at that time have come true 40 years later. And here we are in 1984. And people were talking about that. And people were warning about it. And 40 years later, here we are. We are at those warnings, where people have no more rights.
Yeah, the order in council itself, I mean, it was used, like I think I was reading like Joe Clark one time used it to free Canadians, I guess, from like the Iranian hostage crisis. He gave them passports to get back home. Like that's one thing, and I've heard it's been used maybe for emergency appointments of things. But when you get like Justin Trudeau using an order in council, whatever your views are on guns, he's using it because of the whole COVID thing, and he's able to enact an emergency measure. And the Governor General doesn't even so much as, or even the Queen, so much as go, wait a minute, let's check the constitutionality of this. Let's check to see first if we should be doing this. Because that's their referee.
The OIC was used to inter Japanese Canadians in World War II. It was used again as Harper to deny Omar Khadr's sister's a passport. It was used, I can't remember the other time, by Harper again as a very minor, it had to do with a security certificate. And so it's been used very sparingly. It's always been there, but it has more weight now, and it doesn't have to be debated, and the PMO's office can do that. The elected council, Privy Council can do that. And the really amazing part is that the egregious amount of restrictions he put on the bill to ban firearms without any debate whatsoever, and nobody's upset about that other than the firearms community. Nothing will change. You can take every gun out of my gun cabinet that I have, and it will not change one iota of the street crime that's there. I don't know if you've seen the video out of Toronto of the gangbanger shootout over the rapper's funeral. Five different guns behind the dumpsters. You should really look that up, because this is where the real problem is. It's not legal law-abiding firearms owners. It just isn't.
No,
it's just not. And take them all away, and you still have the only people with guns is or gangs and police and criminals. I don't know if you see my post this morning. 280 or 426 discharges from Toronto Police Services alone. 284 officer-involved shootings with injuries for 2019. Those are the stats. You know how many legal law-abiding firearms owners were charged with things? 4. So to me, this was over the Toronto Police getting C8 carbines. Notice how they're carbines, not assault rifles. Besides the criminals killing people, the highest killers of people in Canada is the Toronto Police Services for that demographic. They are right behind the criminals in the amount of deaths that are occurred of citizens.
What's the thing? And I'm pretty sure that like Canada has a history of protecting guns. It's not like we've had gun control since our founding. It's just that like you were saying also about property rights, it eventually gets, when you start teaching a whole generation, when you sort of whitewash history with revisionist elements and you say, well, no, this is the way we do it now, or back then that was it, that or you sort of negate it, or you say that that's how they did it back then, but that's not how we do it now, or no, that we never did it that way. Then all of a sudden you get this change in people's thinking. You start creating a generation after generation after generation who starts to believe that, yeah, well, we can't just have loose laws on guns because anybody can get them. What if a crazy psychopath got them and he went around on a rampage? Like, what's
Daniel Wortman, Nova Scotia.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we've lost Greg for a second, but yeah,
you're never going to stop the crazies, the terrorists, the bombers, the people that run over people in cars, the husband that beats his wife. But what you can always assured with rights is the ability to defend yourself in any means necessary to preserve your life if someone's trying to take it. Well, we don't have those rights. You're always going to have the crazies. You're always going to have people that want to do ill will. I've seen it live. I've seen it in person. I've experienced the ability of man to be inhumane. And at the end of the day, the only thing that can protect you is yourself. And in Canada, that's a very dangerous thing to do. Because even if you go to jail, get out of jail, and win your case, you're still going to be sued. And they're going to sue your property insurance, which is not about freedom and rights. It's not about property. It's not about defense. It's not about protecting your way of life or your income or what you worked hard for in life. I am flabbergasted that 7 years ago, I found out about this stuff. I served the military defending what I thought was a constitution with freedom and democracy and all that. And it's a complete fabrication of lies. My friends died for nothing as far as I'm concerned. They didn't die for land rights, property rights, free speech, the right to live your life freely. We don't have none of that. And as far as I'm concerned, and I'm not denigrating and I'm not putting down any one of those deaths, because we all believe giving our lives in service of country was a good thing.
Of course.
But what are we fighting for? What are we fighting to retain? And this is really what the thing that I will take to my grave is a terrible thing. I thought we were fighting for something. And I don't believe that we were fighting for anything. We're just doing the will of agendas.
That's a powerful statement.
Is that one of the reasons why you switched from the Conservatives to the Libertarian?
No, that fight was with Pierre Poilievre in 2013 and 14 and 15, when I was part of 4 different veterans groups trying to fight with the government and work with the government to put together effective coverage for injured veterans. And I'm one of those injured veterans. And I had many meetings at the point where I would have 2 RCMP officers overlooking me because I'm trying to get him to be held to account with the legislation that they were creating. And then I realized at that point, when Harper was closing offices, that it wasn't about us. It was about window dressing, like most government policies are. And I was so disenchanted with the Conservatives, I literally went into a political void. And one day I just seen this Facebook post about libertarians. It was probably about the same time I was looking at First Amendments, and it kind of, clicked like that. And boom, next thing you know, I found out that I didn't have rights. I got my gun license. Me, a combat veteran, had to come back to Canada, where I was allowed, permitted, and encouraged to kill people for protection of the Crown equipment or myself. Wow. I come back to Canada and they tell me I have to have a license and I don't have rights to protect my own property, my own family, my own personal life without limitations. But I could do all that. I could protect a can of Coke from the government of Canada and kill somebody on behalf of the government.
Isn't that incredible?
That shows you that
in the face.
That shows you that the individual rights don't matter to them. It's all about their agenda, whatever that may be at the time. It's just more about control agenda over the individual rather than the individual rights.
Well, it's even more sinister than that, because what do we send our, and I don't want to become all political on the sense of soldiering, because everybody does it for a different reason. But why is it okay for us to protect on behalf of government, fellow soldiers, which I would do long before government ever gave me permission to do anything? my fellow brethren. But it became okay for us to do that on behalf of the government, but the government doesn't extend those same rights to your own personal private property. And that was a big conundrum for me to do. What did we die for? What did we die for? World War I, they died for apple pie and, you know, the farmstead and to be able to keep my way of life. What are we dying for today across the world? Now, I'm not just talking Canada, I'm talking all over the world. Unless you're fighting for freedom, like literally fighting for freedom, tyranny, fighting against tyranny, there's no death in the world that's I would support anymore for any kind of active war scenario that didn't involve someone personally attacking you, personally attacking some helpless person, or personally attacking the country of Canada. That is the only reasonable way that I would go to war anymore, or support it.
But you know what they'll say, right? But if we don't go there and attack them, then they're going to come over here and attack us.
Well, that's a convenient excuse, but the reality is what war has done us any good? Now, I'm not against like a World War II against an evil Nazi Germany trying to take over the war. I don't have a problem with that, but I think it should be voluntary, right? If you want to go fight the war, I don't believe in conscription.
No.
If they come to Canada and you don't fight, then you lose what you got. It's as simple as that. And when people are pressed, they fight. How did Bosnia go in the first 9 weeks that I was there for neighbors and living next door to each other, killing each other after knowing each other for 20 years and hating them? That's just, how does society go to that? And if it ever came to Canada, that's what would happen.
That's
people would fight for their rights.
Yeah, that's collectivism. That's tribalism right there, right? Because the Serbs were there was a civil war with, was it the Croats or was it
the Croatians, the Bosnians, and the Serbians, and they voted to separate and form 3 enclaves, and that basically was the. But it's always been there. It's been there for hundreds of years. That whole ethnicity problem.
Well, that's
it. Just festered, and they got a democratic process, and people went to war over it.
Yeah, and even like, you know, we'd have to do a whole show on that. Every once in a while, I've been slowly trying to do some research on how countries like post-Soviet Union collapse have kind of tried to, because they were like kind of in a very precarious position, right? Because if they don't form the right government with the right players, then you're going to just revert back to what you had, which is a totalitarian government. But when you're trying to democratize, you're trying to bring in some freedoms, it's tough, right? Because the people, they want change, but depending on who you put in, you can just have a softer version of what you had. And it's interesting, right? I mean, some of the players there, like what's his name? The president of the Czech Republic, the first one, Václav Havel, right after Czechoslovakia broke up into 2 countries, Slovakia and the Czech Republic, right? He was really a popular guy because he was sort of seen as like a unifier, right? And even in Canada, he was well respected. So, but then if you get somebody else that comes in and, you know, that's not so much, and I'm going to do it my way, then are you any better than? It's kind of like Russia, right? Okay, Stalin and Lenin were bastards, but then you look at Putin; he seems like a softer form of it. So you got to be careful.
Putin is just as bad as Stalin, but Putin actually, in Russia, you have more rights in Russia right now than you do in Canada. You have more rights to property in Cuba than you do in Canada.
I'm curious. I was reading a recent article about how in Cuba, like Raul Castro, the brother of Fidel, actually put to a referendum like a whole like package of like constitutional reforms. Like, we're gonna have a new constitution. We're gonna include property rights. Hint, hint, Canada, if that matters. Because it could just be subjected to Section 1, the reasonable limits. We can get into that after. But there's a whole whack of stuff, right? And I don't know, like, I think like the referendum got like overwhelming support. I think it was like in the 60s or 70% or something like that. It was definitely like well over 50%. And I don't know if the wheels came in motion or if that was all just political theater. But
I'm not really sure, but the countries that broke up after the Soviet Union embraced free market capitalism. They didn't have government infrastructures in place, and they kind of just developed. And yeah, there was a bit of oligarchy and there was a bit of cronyism, and they are better off today than they were under communism because they have more ability to provide for themselves and make a living for themselves. I don't know what the current political status is, but I definitely can say that the freedom index in freer markets have gone up in former communist countries.
Well, that's happened in China as well. They've opened there when was it Ping? I think it was when Ping was in power. He opened up the economy to the world, and
So who got blacklisted by the U.S. for opening up the first trade negotiations with China?
it was Canada, wasn't it?
Yeah, who though? Pierre Elliott Trudeau.
Oh yeah, the one who wanted to turn us basically into a communist country, or kind of didn't rule it out. Yeah.
And he actually was the first NATO diplomat to go over to China and open trade negotiations. 25, 30 years later, we've moved all that manufacturing offshore to China and killed those jobs in Canada to the point where we don't manufacture nothing. We actually fight over giant companies over our resources to be sent to other countries to be produced for us to consume. And that blue collar manufacturing base is pretty much non-existent from our natural resources because taxation is so high, we can't afford to pay the workers or run the businesses for the Ontario electrical rates or whatever to be able to manufacture our own raw goods. But taxation is what drove those those manufacturers away. And they did it because China was able to open up and take our raw materials and have a cheap labor pool to do it. And in the process, companies here went, well, listen, if I can make this more profit off of cheaper labor, that's how Canada developed its great relationship, as Trudeau and Trudeau Sr. and even Harper or Mulroney said, was because they were able to move those markets and production offshore and increase their profits back home.
Right.
Well, I remember that big argument when they were talking about NAFTA too. It's going to drive all our manufacturing jobs out of the country down to Mexico, and that happened in a great extent too.
Well, what is NAFTA?
The North America Free Trade Agreement.
What NAFTA is actually a government-controlled and regulated market that only allows big players. Marco, if you won $10 billion tomorrow and you wanted to bring a brand new electric car to market and you put $1 billion in investment in building a plant that produces 10 cars a month, you could not find a parking lot to sell them in North America unless you lobbied the government and lobbied the other industries in order to sell that across the border. Controlled, regulated markets to ensure that only the government players and the large corporations can play in it, and it actually stifles innovation and growth in Canada. USMC, same thing. Milk, same thing. Controlled, regulated government markets to ensure only the large players can play in them.
Yeah, I hear that a complaint from small dairy farmers. They find it really tough to compete against the big ones because of the dairy cartel and how that's all controlled.
Yeah, it's this fear of becoming absorbed by the Americans. Oh, we don't want that American milk. It's got hormones in it, and so then you elect people. The Conservatives are the worst for that too. I mean, the Liberals love supply management. I'm sure the NDP and the Greens, the Conservatives. I mean, Scheer, he arrogantly starts drinking a carton of milk because he knew that people were criticizing him about that.
Yeah, he knew that the dairy farmers of Canada actually swayed those 8,000 votes that kicked out Max.
Oh,
and it's really quite funny because when Trudeau won, he went on to the USMC, which involved giving up more share of our milk market to the Americans, which is 2%. It doesn't sound like a lot, but that's why you see these American brands on the shelf right now. Have you noticed butter on sale used to be like $2.99 a pound? It's now $7, $8 a pound here. Well, guess what happened? They got a percentage of the dairy market coming into Canada. And as a result of that, the dairy farmers' quotas and profits lowered. So what did the government do? Besides giving them already $190 million worth of subsidies each year to the dairy farmers of Canada, he said, because of the losses in that market, we're going to give you $272 million more per year. And guess what? Did our prices drop? Did they stay the same? No, they did not. And this is what the problem is, that people don't realize that, I took a picture of a pound of seal test butter at Loblaws the other day, Gale and Weston, $7.76. $7.
I saw that.
And when will people realize that that kind of inflation hurts people in their pocketbook, but doesn't affect corporations whatsoever? Because they're still paying the farmers the poor rate for their milk.
But don't worry, because they'll just slap on a corporate tax. What that's not going to affect the prices or anything. Oh, wait a minute.
No, like minimum wage didn't create inflation.
No. Well, that's another thing. Is that, do you find that it's inevitable that has to go up because, like, until we deal with inflation? Because it almost seems like for sure, like you know for sure that it's going to price people out of getting into the job market. But the problem is that where the other side wins is they go, well, yeah, but every year things keep going up because of inflation. And instead of addressing that elephant in the room, they just go, well, you just have to keep raising the wages. It's almost like you can't win until that.
So let's talk about that. Why was a loaf of bread 25 cents in 1972? A loaf of bread. I can remember going to the store and getting a loaf of bread for my dad, and a pack of cigarettes was 64 cents.
Wow.
If you look at since 1972, if you look at Canada's debt on a chart, you'll see that debt has been a linear curve going up and up and up. It's got actually a big spike right now with Trudeau's. They say it's 252, but it's $352 billion is what he's actually done in the last 8 weeks. So since 1972, the debt of Canada has been rising, and taxation has had to rise in accordance with it. Couple that with Bank of Canada and artificial inflationary practices that they do when they do all these debt financing, and when you increase taxation either through a carbon tax or a gasoline tax or a road tax or this, what happens is everything else has to go up in cost. So then you get now the poverty, which the politicians could say, we need $14 an hour, we need $15 an hour because these evil corporations are taking your money. No, they're making tons of money. It's I did a report, and Greg, you'll remember this during the election, where I showed that the net gain of the Ontario government from $12.60 an hour to $14 an hour would produce an extra $503 million a year in revenue taken directly off your paycheck for everybody that got a pay increase. That was just the Ontario government, and it went up exponentially. And as a result of that, my son went from $12.60 as a cashier at Loblaws to $14 an hour, and boom, like that, he had this pile of money in his pocket. He only works 24 hours. That's $48, $100 every 2 weeks. Well, you ask him today, we were talking about it about 3 months ago. I said, how much of that buying power do you have left? He said, Dad, I have even less now. Because as a result of that, Loblaws had to raise the price of everything. The cost of GST went up, the cost of fuel went up. Everything went up to cover the cost of labor for that. So government creates artificial inflation, and in 2 years' time, it'll be guaranteed $15 an hour.
Well, and they've definitely caused inflation here with this COVID lockdown, because now, not only with all these CERB payments and all these subsidies, companies also have to now spend all this extra money on COVID protection. Like our company, for example, has to supply masks. We have to supply these little plastic things to open doors so we don't touch it with our hands. All the extra cleaning materials, and then all these other restrictions put on companies now because of COVID. That's just going to drive the cost of their products up because they're not going to pay for it. It's just going to be passed on to the consumer.
Well, see, that's the one problem with that whole government mandated regulations on business, which are actually covered by workers' compensation that protects employees. And I don't disagree with workers' rights and protections for employees. However, when the government decides to shut down a business or regulate and control a business, we should not have a lockdown. What we should have had is companies that wanted to stay open should have been able to stay open and put in place social distancing and provide as part of the free market, not the actual raping of the free market and the tax base. Like the city of Ottawa, Marco, you're in Ottawa with me. Nobody's riding the bus, and those people that are riding it aren't paying for it because that little Presto swipe card's at the front, and you can't get near the front.
No, I just recently, because I've been taking it right up until they just started making the masks, I guess, mandatory. But
no, they're not. You won't be kicked off for it.
Okay, perfect. But what they were doing, yeah, they were putting the police caution tape to block off, like to separate the back and the front, and then the drivers are kind of like encased in plastic. I think recently they just took off that tape, but then they recommend that you wear a mask. But you're right, it was a ghost town on the bus, ghost town.
And
And
so, I mean, instead of having a lockdown, allow every business to try to thrive and survive by doing their own, one, protect their own employees, which they have a right to be protected, and two, try to create a living and earn a living. And this is going to, the ripple effects of the economy and the $351 billion are not going to be felt till next spring. I predict in November we're going to have an election, and I predict that Trudeau will get a majority government. I predict that he will stand up there saying, listen, I've done the best that I can for Canada. We responded to Canadian needs. We reached out to Canadians and we took care of them. When they needed money, we were there.
Yeah.
And the reality is that it will work.
Oh,
and
yeah.
If he goes in November,
his approval ratings are through the roof right now.
I don't believe any stats anymore, to be honest with you. Anything that comes from the mainstream media. And even stats from Stats Canada are manipulated for government reporting. But if he goes in November, the Conservatives won't have time to brand their leader as well. But if he waits to the spring, Canada is going to be in a full-blown recession where bankruptcies and personal debt are going to go through the roof. That will cause a full recession, and you can't run an election then unless you keep COVID locked down all winter and provide CERB payments the whole winter, and then run in the spring.
Well, CTV,
second wave.
CTV a few weeks ago already told us the second wave's coming in October.
How do they know?
Well, with flu season, 98% recovery rate.
Yeah, but that's what they're saying. Here comes the second wave in October. That's what they're worried.
It's going to be 2 vaccines.
My wife unfollowed me on Facebook because she's a nurse and living it with seniors right now in the job that she does. She can. She doesn't believe in the restrictive lockdowns, but she doesn't believe in what I'm saying in regards to. I should be more careful about what I say to discourage people from walking around freely. And she comes from a nursing perspective.
Well, my friend's wife is the same way. She's not a nurse, but she works in a hospital, and she's obviously being very cautious and everything who comes over and whatnot. But I don't know. I don't believe the hype. I don't believe there's really much to be afraid of. I think you have just as much chance of getting hit by a car than you are going to die of COVID-19.
You got a 40% higher chance of either one of those two options than dying of COVID-19.
Exactly. So you can't live your life cooped up for the rest of your life. And, as we said earlier, no crisis has gone to waste. And, the more we let government keep control, the longer we let them keep control, the harder it is to get everything back.
Right. And my son's a cashier. My wife's a nurse, and I work right behind the mission. I work right in front of the mission, Marco. I'm downtown with those people every day. And quite frankly, wash your hands, don't touch your face. Simple as that.
Well, that's what we've been told. I work at one of your son's competitors. I work in the retail industry too, and that's one of the things that we're told. And it's been very much be careful, and people still aren't following the arrows on the ground, But the thing is, even if you did, I mean, with what they're saying, I
never follow arrows.
you somebody just get close to somebody, and everyone's kind of. It's. I don't know.
The lockdown should have occurred for those. They should have been optional. It should have been giving people to have the freedom to make that choice themselves. And the forced lockdown is really what the issue is. People can decide to go out and do what they want to do. The forced lockdown was to protect a very weak system that was prepared and unprepared, both financially and plan-wise. Tam, what about it? We should have. Well, they've been in power for 4 years. What do they do with Canada's stock? Nothing.
Yeah.
And but nobody's holding people to account for that. What about Wynne? What did she do to do the supplies? What has Ford done? Nobody. They all knew it was coming every year in the nursing industry and the in the aged industry, whether it be public or private, you get influenza outbreaks. My wife's been doing it for 26 years, and people die from the regular flu and cold that goes rampant around, or C. diffi, or the other kind of diseases that come from hospitals, breeding grounds of death for elderly and those with weak immune systems. We should open everything up, and anybody who feels compromised, stay home, apply for it. Everything else should be open. Anybody who doesn't feel safe, stay home, apply for the CERB. But everybody else, go back to work.
Well, this is the thing. I think I'm going to have a couple questions. So the first thing is, what do you make of, because it seems like every time now things get opened up, of course, then we see where, let's say it's in Canada or the States or wherever, now, oh my God, there's a spike because now people are out and they're out and about. Is it because they didn't develop that herd immunity because they were locked up? That's the only thing I can think of, right? But because you say herd immunity, then people go, no, they should have, they had to stay locked up because then they might have died. Well, what about now? It's almost like they prolonged the agony, potentially.
It was designed that way.
Yeah.
And I'll say that by premising it with this. At first, unless you presented symptoms, unless you actually had these things, they wouldn't even see you in the Ottawa area at a COVID testing center.
Yeah.
I.e., call in, I think I should go, or you're presenting a fever. No, don't come in. So they restricted people, and the numbers were there. The numbers were small. And then all of a sudden they said, well, now we're going to extend it to this. Now anybody can go in and get a test. So the numbers have continued to be consistent as they've opened up more testing. If you really wanted to lock the people down, then you should have opened up testing for everybody right off the bat, because Ontario can do 14,000 tests a day. In basically 180 days, you could test the whole province. And so now we have anybody who wants to get tested, guess what? Go down and get a test, which supports the government's data that we have increased rising numbers. Have a protest, Black Lives Matter. Been no spike, it seems. But have a protest on Parliament Hill with the Yale hooligans 2 weeks ago in Toronto. Apparently there's a spike in them because of the protests on the weekend. So where is the agenda being played out? Is it media selling papers, or is it government trying to keep this narrative in place? And who the hell is Doug Ford? I thought he was a conservative, and he's not keeping this province locked down.
He's a progressive conservative.
He's a neoconservative.
Well, I don't know what he is. I've never liked him. He got elected without a platform, and I knew nothing would change. Everybody said we tried to go back to vote from 2017-18. Tell me what's going to change in the next 4 years.
He spent more money.
Yeah, has our deficit gone down? No. Simple as that.
But I think the biggest warning that they knew what they were going to do, and they knew this was the big plan, and they know they're not going to be giving back stuff because they've already coined it. They coined it right from the beginning. The new normal. They've already told us that it's not going back to normal because this is the new normal. So what?
Global warming didn't work. Climate change didn't work. The ozone didn't work. The 12 years didn't work. 12 years, the world's going to end. Trump didn't work. And all of a sudden, when people started not believing in the Greta world of and environmental, Michael Moore came out with a movie that talked about the money behind it and the politics. Well, launch the COVID, because that's the only way we're going to convince the people that we are the benevolent government to look after them. And that might sound like a tinfoil nut bar conspiracy theory, but I mean, really, if you just open your eyes, you can see it. Trudeau wants it. He's been asking for it. You know, they've been talking about universal basic income for years. They were going to do it with carbon taxation, but now he's got this kind of convenient world pandemic that doesn't really kill a whole lot of people.
Yeah, well, actually,
let's put that fear out there, and people will comply.
Yeah, well, we still see it in the media every day with global say, oh, Canada's cases have gone, close to 100,000. Well, they don't tell you that close to 70,000 have already been resolved.
Or how many died? A little over 8,000.
Yeah, they don't tell you that. It's just they give you the biggest number to strike the most amount of fear in people.
But what happened?
276,000, half of that heart attacks and falls.
Yeah, but the thing is, they'll look at that 8,000 number and go, "That's 8,000 too many." If it saves just one life, the typical statist argument, right? If it just saves
But
one life,
then we should ban cars. We should ban everything. We should
live in a bubble.
wrap ourselves up in bubble wrap.
Climate change right now, though. The Greens aren't. The
Mm.
Greens, the NDP, are talking about universal basic income. Think about that. Nobody's talking about climate change.
Even
They're
Greta,
talking about
Greta Thunberg. Even Greta Thunberg is moved on to the COVID crisis.
Right? So really, what is, I mean, maybe I'm a nut bar. I don't know. Maybe I'm a conspiracy theorist. I don't know. But the correlation between more steps towards democratic socialism, communism, whatever you want to talk about, seems to be a worldwide manufactured way to slip that into the guise of people living and accepting a basic income. If that happens, what's going to happen is the corporations and the government will control the whole of Canada, and we will then become basically tenants of Canada with a monthly stipend.
Pretty much. I mean, that's kind of what CERB is doing right now. It's sort of weaning people, instead of off, it's weaning them on to that kind of idea of a UBI. And at first, when I first heard about it, I said, well, if it replaces all the current programs and you just be giving people cash, what's the issue? But then you start looking at it and you go, my God, inflation, it's going to make people dependent. How much are you giving these people? Is it going to make people want to work less? I mean, there's a lot of problems there. It's like you said, you're going to create a bunch of dependent people, and here's your monthly stipend, right? And then on top of that, it's crazy to me, because what you're going to see now is you're going to see people who, like right now, people are having trouble staffing because people don't want to go back to work. I typically work 2 jobs, right? And one of them got shut down because of COVID. So there goes one source of income. My current source of income, if I went on CERB right now, I'd be making more on CERB than, crazy.
And those that were working 24 to 36 hours a week and making $1,100 gross a month are now getting $2,000. Why the hell would they want to go back to work? For sitting at home, sitting on YouTube, Instagram, and Snapchat.
That's going to have to get paid for sooner or later.
It's coming.
Yeah,
it's coming in the form of, I don't think they'll reduce government because that's a voting block, like lay off public servants. I can see them cutting the military and saying we don't need as many jet fighters and stuff like that. I can see them raising carbon taxes, raising all kinds of, a COVID tax.
Yeah.
To help pay
that's what I say. I think they're going to make a COVID tax.
Of course they will.
COVID tax.
They've already flooded it. The media put it out 2 weeks ago. How they socialize people and condition people to the new normal, while COVID tax was now to come back in 2 weeks' time. And it will depend upon government or Trudeau getting a majority government. If he goes in November, he will get a majority government. End of story.
End of story. I mean,
I got friends that kids are at home that can't work that have $10,000 in the bank from CERB.
Yeah, I know. Well, we're a little over an hour now, and I think that a good thing really to talk about, I would say, is it kind of dovetails into a question that I was going to ask earlier. That is, okay, so suppose that we have a libertarian on the podium, leadership debate. Say it's yourself, Tim Moen, whoever. That what you said about predicting what Trudeau's going to say, it almost sounds like he would say that. Well, we've been there for Canadians, right? How do you combat against that? Because you're proposing the free market approach, and people should voluntarily open if they wanted to and close if they want, if you want to stay home. And okay, do you have a program like CERB in place? Or because if we tell people just rely on private charity, right now they've been weaned on believing that government has to be there, even in a minimum sense. That, like, what do you do in an election or any time?
So the way to answer that is not to argue against the CERB or not to argue against the benevolent government. The way to do that is to point out how the government destroyed the economy and created the need for people to be dependent upon government, therefore removing anything but government from their ability to profit and enterprise and grow and have wealth. So you can't defeat the argument of helping people. You can't say that we're going to have our own CERB or we're going to take it away. You have to point out the hypocrisy of the government that created the conditions that created the need therefore the desire to be benevolent and get themselves elected again. So that's the only way that you can point that out. If you didn't shut down the economy, if you allowed businesses to do this, and if you were better prepared for this, like you should have been for the last 14 years, Theresa Tam or Doug Ford under the Liberals or the Conservative government, and if we had a more robust healthcare system that wasn't 50% administration and 50% frontline service, then and you could have weathered this while still keeping the economy going and people working. But no, you shut down the economy to protect your political futures, and what you did was create a dependency upon government, therefore destroying the tax base of Canada, which is the medium and small sized businesses. And this is as far as I'm concerned, this was the goal of government to do it. It wasn't to be benevolent; it was to become dependent.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Trudeau really admires China's system. I think he's actually said that in the interviews, how he admires China's dictatorship.
Yeah. They're able to turn the economy around on a dime with a gun at your head.
Yeah, and we see behind the scenes China's corporations starting to buy up our gold mines, our oil sands, and everything like that. So it's almost like Trudeau is trying to align himself with China in the background and take over as a dictator more than
so ironically, that's not far from what his father did. Pierre Elliott Trudeau nationalized the oil services of Canada. For the last 4.5 years, Trudeau has destroyed, through environmental policies, regulatory policies, that stopped our bitumen from getting to market. And it's almost perfect timing for COVID to come around, where the economy is destroyed, where we go into a recession, where all of a sudden oil sands become the new tax base by nationalizing, because they're worthless. How do you pay for COVID? You nationalize those pockets of oil now that are worthless as a market, and you turn them back towards the profit of Canada. It's almost like that was designed to be that way. If you really want to think about it, why would we stop our product from getting to market, if you didn't have a long-term plan? Crazy thinking again, but why wouldn't he nationalize that and sell it to Canadians for a profit? Just like his father did.
Something to think about.
Something to think about, that's for sure.
Well, unfortunately, he's tearing apart the country to do it. Like this whole, it's not just Trudeau. It's like all the world left leaders are just, from mayors to governors to anybody on the left. They're just letting this divide grow. They're helping it grow, and media's just playing right along with it, right on the right and the left.
On the right, look at Trump. He's not helping.
Well, it's not just Trump. You see right media; they'll just say the exact opposite of what the left media is saying, and they're just
because that's the market that they pander to. Trump panders to his market. The Biden panders to his market.
And now it's almost like we're at the boiling point where it's about to erupt. The lines have been drawn almost.
Yeah.
How do you pander to a market when you control it? How do you assure that the government, let's talk about the defund the police just as a default. Sure. Defund the police. Jojo from the American Libertarian Party said that the best way to solve the police problem is to not necessarily defund them, but put performance and liability insurance on each officer to be a professional. And if someone has a lot of complaints against them, then they lose their job based on their performance factors. Right now, qualified immunity keeps them from being anything and puts the taxpayer on liability for poor performance of police.
Yeah.
And if we did that, then you would have professional police, and the bad police would be priced out of a job.
100%. Yeah.
If you look up Jojo's policy on defunding the police and what should actually occur, it's a very, very, and she wants to end the war on drugs like me. So
absolutely, that's another thing.
I think Jojo's the best candidate they got down there.
Yep,
must be.
Don't get me wrong. I love Trump. I absolutely love Trump. I love his politics. I love his ability to drive the left crazy. I think he's a despicable human being. But I love Kathleen Wynne. I say that out loud. I love Kathleen Wynne's politics. I despise the woman.
What do you
Yeah.
mean you loved her politics?
She was able to maintain power, running us up in deficit and do all that she did. So that's political astuteness by reading the population, the demographics. Trump
Okay.
reads the demographics. Trudeau reads the demographics. I respect and admire people who are good at what they do. I don't care if they're good at killing. I don't care if they're good at politics. I don't care if they're good at running a company. So you have to look at 13 years of being in power. That takes a certain amount of political savvy to do so. So I admire that aspect of it.
Yeah,
I
look at
hate
Dalton
it.
McGuinty.
Same with Harper. Harper
Yep.
was in for
Harper,
12 years.
McGuinty, same thing. Yeah. Chrétien.
Yeah. Putin.
Well,
Chrétien and Martin were the only Canadian politicians since Trudeau Sr. who actually balanced the budget and didn't grow the deficit for 2 years. Look that up. And they did it by taking $8 billion from our CPP.
Pension, wasn't it?
yeah.
And $4 billion from the EI fund.
Yeah, so they just
By the way,
smudged the
Chrétien's
numbers.
policy and taking it from CPP, guess what? It's because for the last 20 years that CPP growth lost that $8 billion for the growth. That's why Trudeau had to enact a higher CPP rate, because we lost that growth potential from that period of time. It's not because it wasn't doing well. It's because they took $8 billion worth of worth out of it that could have matured over 20 years.
Yeah.
Because they didn't want to. That's the thing. That's why you have to look at the Chrétien balancing the budget, Martin balancing the budget with a bit of a grain of salt. It's like, yeah, they did it on for sure, but how did they do it? Because from what I remember, I was just a kid when they were doing this, and just little bits and pieces I've been reading about it is I think that because it said that they cut entitlement spending, but it's not like they did like a drastic, like we're going to get rid of anything, and the taxation too. I mean, we're going to get rid of the GST. No, you didn't. You didn't do anything with it.
Yeah, the Red Book lie, but I mean, they did cut the public service.
Yeah, a little bit.
Chrétien, no, they decimated the public service and the military at the same time.
Yeah,
so they were
military.
acting like a conservative in his first term.
Yeah,
they decimated and brought in the force reduction program, both in the military and the public service, and people lost jobs, lots of people. So but we had for years, Paul Martin and Chrétien said, we're going to invest $2 billion a year in a national daycare program.
I remember that.
And they did for 13 years. Where is it?
Yeah, exactly.
Where is it?
Yeah. The NDP will probably ask
$1 billion a year. Where'd that money go? It's sort of like Trudeau's infrastructure, billions of dollars for the fund. Where is it?
Billions have gone missing.
Where is it?
Yeah, unaccounted for.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
This is why government shouldn't be in any of this business whatsoever.
No.
No. Well, he had no business background. He's a drama teacher. Like, he didn't. What business? He's probably never seen a spreadsheet in his life. Where would he ever work with numbers and spreadsheets and balanced budgets? It just never happened in his lifetime.
Maybe when he was a ski instructor and he charged for services, who knows?
Yeah, he was just a lowly ski instructor. That
He
wouldn't
was
have
born
been
of
done by
money.
him.
He's never struggled like you or I. He's never gone without. He always had daddy's ability to go and do all these things because he had a basic income from dad. He never really had a job that would produce the kind of income for the lifestyle. And when his father passed in 2002, they got $2 million inheritance, and they created the Trudeau Foundation. I wrote a post on this, and someone tore me apart on the other day. Trudeau then entered politics in 2007. Prior to 2007, that $2 million had grown to $3 million. As of 2020, it's now worth $146 million. His children will be the same. His children will be the same privileged children that he was growing up on a trust fund, and they will never understand a spreadsheet or balancing a budget.
No. That's right. He learned that it's the same as the Clinton Foundation. They're all slush funds, just for favors. It's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
So Tim Hortons Smile Day made $25 million this year.
Yeah,
$25 million, right? Raised for Tim Hortons charity.
Yeah.
Guess
Right.
what Tim Hortons did with that $25 million that people donated? People donated that, not Tim Hortons. They
Yeah.
got a $25 million tax break, and they took that $25 million and they put it into Tim Hortons charity, where all their friends are on the boards. And that charity then works as a slush fund. And
Yeah.
oh, by the way, all that labor that was there for that day, all that business operating cost equated to $14 million more tax write-offs. So people gave Tim Hortons $25 million of their money for them to get a $25 million tax write-off from the government of Canada.
Ooh. Ooh.
That's how corporate charity works. McDonald's, Ronald McDonald's House, all the money collected for McDonald's goes directly to Ronald McDonald's charities, chaired by, so look up who's on the board. All
Yep.
familiar names.
Yep.
And the people donate that money, and the companies get to take their employees' time and business operating costs as another tax write-off. That's corporate charity. But how much of it actually, of that $25 million, goes to help that kid in the hospital? And yes, they do have Ronald McDonald. I'm not putting it down. I'm just pointing out
Oh,
the
yeah.
simple fact. What used to be a private charitable effort is now a corporate charitable tax break.
So
What-
the government gets
What I
involved.
think the biggest charity scam going on right now is the BLM charity. If you go to the BLM website and you click on the donate to the BLM,
Scandal.
it takes you to another website. It's called
Mhm.
Act Blue.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that Act Blue, all that money goes directly to a Democrat presidential nominee. The biggest earners: Bernie Sanders, 180 million; Joe Biden, 120 million; Andrew Yang, 80 million. This is
Follow
just a
the
big.
money. Old Green
That's
said
right.
it best. Follow the
That's
money.
right. That's right. This
And
is just a
you
big
know, for
scam.
all, do I disagree with the Black Lives Matter movement? I do not disagree with it as a individual protesting and the right to protest. But I want to hold a White Lives Matter protest.
But I think all these
And I think
people
we should
that think they're
nationalize a White Lives Matter. And if you see the hypocrisy behind me, the laughter over this, then you understand what the agenda is in identity politics.
Of course.
well, I think
Because
the sad thing is all these people that think they're protesting and raising money for awareness, and they think they're doing good. They're just being played by the same people that have been playing them since slavery, the Democrat Party. They're just being played all over again.
Do you want to know who the
It's-
most oppressed people in Canada are? First Nations. Since the institution of Canada was formed, we have systematically created genocide. If you want to see a true universal basic income in a true communist society, then look at the way the government treats the First Nations people. They don't own land. They don't have any money of their own. They get a monthly check from the government. They don't even own the houses that they're in. That's why they have no personal investment in the house. So therefore, if a house falls for disrepair, it's the government's responsibility. There's no personal worth to that house. They've basically created a socialist environment utopia where we have the highest suicide, murder rates, drinking, drug, because it's 100% government control. Those are the most genocidal. Those are the government that is basically the FN Lives Matter is what should be out there protesting. Canadians should be out there. We had I forget her name, Harriet Tubman or whatever her name was, that created the Underground Railroad, and we actually have people that there is racism in Canada, of course there is. There racist comments in Canada, yeah, but not systematic racism except against First Nations people. But you're right, Greg. It is only the money that matters behind it.
right.
Trudeau standing there wasn't because he believed Black Lives Matter.
But that's the reason why you see all the Democratic the mayors, the governors, and all these Democratic states and cities. That's why they're not doing anything about it. Because the longer it goes on, the more money their party makes. Why would they want to stop it? It's an easy money maker.
So if you want to see the hypocrisy behind it, is Trudeau did not come out of Rideau Cottage for all that time, and he came out for that one photo opportunity for the exact same reasons that you said, because there was a demographic that it would appeal to across Canada. So you take that now as an issue, LGBT, First Nations, kept throwing cash cow money at them. You take the government workers, you take all of the things that the federal government is pandering to, whether it be CERB payments or immigration payments, the total pandering to identity groups based on the 14 largest populations in Canada cities is you have about 70% of the demographics that will support what he's doing, hence the reason why he got a minority government, because he pandered to all those groups and those vote-rich demographics. The rest of Canada doesn't matter. Just like Ford didn't win Toronto Centre, but he won the rest of Ontario.
That's right.
And you don't need anybody else but Ontario and Quebec to win an election. And then you need the major metropolitan centers. And if you design policies around identity politics and the different groups that he supports, then you easily find within those demographics the most amount of ridings and therefore the most amount of chances of becoming the elected power. And that's how it works. It's not about your rights and freedoms. It's about how can they maintain power through identity politics and vote-rich demographics.
Right, and we're just pawns in the game. We're all just pawns, really. It's not just they're pandering to the one side, they're also turning the other side against the other side. So we're all just pawns. The more divide they have, the more money they make, and the more control they can have. Right? The more.
How did we get woke? How did we get woke? That's the question you have to ask yourself. How did we wake up to this?
Mm-hmm.
And how come I can't wake up other people to it?
I've been asking myself that since I woke up, really. Like, if you don't want to see the hypocrisy in the media, in the government, in their legislation, in the bills, and if you don't want to see it, then you're not going to. There's a lot of people in this country, like the biggest voting bloc are the voting bloc that don't vote.
Yeah,
because they don't care. They don't pay attention to it. And until you wake up that voting bloc, nothing's going to change. We're going to have to hit rock bottom.
That's
right?
it.
Why is places like Venezuela rioting right now? Like I said on our last pot with Tim Moen, 30 years ago, if you asked a Venezuela and told a Venezuelan person where they are today, they would laugh at you.
Yeah.
They were the richest Latin American country in North America.
Fourth richest,
and now they're the poorest.
Yep.
Like it's just they would laugh at you. And
democratic socialism under Maduro is how that occurred. Nationalize all the different
and Chavez,
That's
right. Or Chavez, sorry. Chavez. And if you look how it occurred.
Yep. And you say that to a Canadian, they'll say, well, it won't happen here.
It will never happen here.
The generation of 16 and 17-year-olds that are getting this CERB and 18 and 19-year-olds will not see it that way.
No.
They are, like David Dingwall said in the 90s, I'm entitled to my entitlements. Right? I'm 57 years old, and I feel like I'm 12 at times. I act like I'm 9. But the reality is the older you get, the more you see the historical facts happening over and over again. I'm a history buff. I never was a constitutionalist or a rights person because I believed I had what I said. And I remember Harper standing up on stage saying that, we are going to look after the veterans. It's our number one priority. And here I am reading through their policy with Pierre Poilievre, and it had nothing to do with that. It was window dressing.
Yeah.
And I said to myself, how did that happen? Like, how did the government tell people they were doing one thing and like you said, Greg, and on the other hand, doing another? It's because they can. People don't understand what a right is versus a privilege is, what a fundamental freedom is versus a right. And this is where really the problem lies, is people don't realize they are subservient to government. They believe they have to be, because that's what they've been conditioned to believe for the last 40 years.
But most people don't know any other way anymore.
No.
The people,
the
people that remember things before OHIP and, before CPP and all these centralized government programs, a lot of them, they're dead.
Yeah. And
Right.
I always premise my conversation on libertarianism. I ask people 4 questions. You should start asking yourself these 4 questions. And in law, the answer is no. Do I own my property?
Mhm.
Do I have free speech? Are you able to defend your property, i.e., someone taking your TV? And do you have an inherent right to self-defense? People say yes to all of them. In law, it's no.
Yeah. Every one of those questions is a no right now.
One of the things that I just started reading an interesting book by Ryan Alford. It's I think it's called the 7 Basic Rights or something like that. Basically, it looks at how Canada kind of lost its way with the rule of law, and we've basically moved to a system of where it used to be where, at least theoretically, that the rule of law would take precedent over any sort of government document. Now it's sort of whatever the government mandates. That rule of law, yeah, okay, but it's whatever the government mandates. So they can do things like bring in the Anti-Terrorism Act and do whatever they want with your civil liberties. They can do things like unlawful search and seizure. They can basically do things like the order in council under emergency measures. Like it's madness that people are just letting this happen because they either don't know what to do, they don't care, or they think that that's how it has to be. It's crazy.
It's the
Well, I
latter.
think
Conditioned to think that that's the government is there to protect them.
Yeah.
Well, I think Mark has the right idea. Tell us a little bit what are you doing with this self sustained project that you got going on and what you teach people.
So my goals in life, or our goals in life, is I got into I'll call it the prepping community about 3 years ago, taking a look at primarily what would happen if there was an EMP. And you can do all your research and all that stuff, but the reality is the world would stop, and we'd be thrown back into the 1800s. And if you're a family man and you have kids, you start to think about that. What can I do to be better prepared? All that prepping stuff eventually leads you down the road to being self-sufficient, because you can have 10 years worth of food, but what do you do after 10 years if you can't grow your own food or figure out how to source and make your own food? So the whole concept behind the idea of Ottawa Homestead Survival, I'm not plugging it because it's still a private page and we haven't got our property even set it up yet, but I want to be able to produce as much as I can of my own for my own consumption, so that I can survive in any way, shape, or form. And if the price of lettuce goes up, or the price of potatoes goes up, or corn or vegetables or something like that, well, I'm sort of insulated a bit. You can get just as good milk out of a goat as you can out of a cow. A cow's much better, but costs 3 times as much to feed. A goat's milk is just like cow's milk. Chickens. People don't understand that, you can get 6 chickens and have 500 eggs a year from 6 chickens. And you can grind your own flour. I buy bulk red wheat berries or red wheat flour, and I grind it. And I make my own flour, and I do my own rye breads, and I make my own yeast starters. And I'd like to be able to produce as much as I could and become an example of a victory garden for yourself. People are talking that word. You heard it in social media. Victory garden existed in World War II, where people would grow as much of their own vegetables because there was so much rationing, and that's the only way that you could get supplementary food. And I think even in Barhaven there, Marco, you might have even noticed there's so many front yard gardens this year that it's incredible.
Yep.
People really got scared by that supply management model, toilet paper prices, whatever it is you want to call it.
Yeah.
They realized how delicate our system is and how quickly they can become destitute.
Yep.
And that's why I want to do it.
Yeah.
Primarily protect my family and my pension against, and my savings against inflation, and to eat better. Simply to eat better and feel more secure.
Well, definitely. If you're growing your own stuff, growing your own chickens and eggs and everything like that, you're not going to get the preservatives and all the chemicals that our lovely government allows companies to put in as fillers and everything else. Right? So some of the scary things you see in food, if you look at any General Mills product, they have trisodium phosphate as a filler, and that's an industrial cleaner. that's not meant to be going in your body, and
One of the
it's
more
definitely-
interesting things. Sorry.
well,
one
it's
of the more-
definitely better to be doing what you're doing and growing.
Well, we're not there yet. We're getting there. But I mean, one of the more interesting things that they've been breeding chickens for almost 3,000 years, and there's a breed of chicken out there right now that, with no hormones and simple feed, a mixture of different types of feed, in 5 to 7 to 9 weeks, depending on how big you want to get them, at $7.50 for a 50-pound bag, you can spend $60 in food for 6 to 9 weeks, get a 6 to 7 pound finished chicken out of it, and you pay $2 for each chicken. But
Yeah, exactly.
they're so big if you don't butcher them after 9 weeks, because of the way they've been bred, there's no hormones in the stuff that you would feed your chicken. They cannot support their physical own weight of their legs, and they would collapse and die because they'd be unable to move if you didn't butcher them after 9 weeks. So I mean,
Right.
to have your own fresh chicken, you buy $30 for the chicken, $60. There's a crazy video out there on YouTube. It's called Chicken Math, and it really works out well. If you buy chickens to make your own eggs, then after 4 years, you're making about $600 a year in eggs, or in return on your $2 investment. So
Well,
it's a more self-sustaining way to live.
With just hunting alone too, like I listen to Joe Rogan and he goes elk hunting. He says, one elk is like 400 pounds of meat. It lasts him a year, and he has so much meat he gives it away. He eats it every day.
As a guy who teaches hunting, people are often surprised at how often they see game and how often they miss game.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not an easy thing to shoot an elk, especially if you don't have transportation. The reality is that even if you had 1,000 rounds of ammunition for a shotgun and the world ended, well, that's eventually going to run out.
Well,
if you don't know how to make black powder, if you don't know how to make your own shot from, say, rock salt, road gravel, I don't know.
Well, I think he now does a lot of bow hunting. So, that's
where do you get the arrows?
Thing, right?
Once you consume all those arrows, where do you get arrows, right? So, I would sooner grow a corn garden and have the deer come in and run out and jump on them and try to kill them that way.
but the thing with arrows too, they're reusable a lot of the times, right? Like they're not like a bullet. Yeah. So I would like to learn bow hunting. That would be cool. That's obviously a huge skill, more so than a gun, I would assume.
Yes, the most ethical, honest, and hardworking hunter out there in the world is an actual compound bow. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, and a lot of time behind the bows, and lots of expense to actually become a proficient shooter with the bow. And you have to be absolutely stealthy. You have to know the wind. You have to know movement. I decided I'm too lazy to do that. I went and got a crossbow, bought 6 bolts, and I put the first one in, and I shot it at the factory-sided thing. It took me another 30 seconds to adjust on the second shot. Guess what? Nothing to learn, and I can plug 40-yard deer all day long, every day, as long as I have bolts.
Well, I think, I've never hunted or shot a gun or shot anything.
9:30 hunt.
But I think it would teach you a lot of patience. It would, it would probably connect you to things that you don't get, obviously, in the city, like a different perspective.
Get your license, come up for one of my camp weekends. At the very least, we'll smoke a few bowls, drink a few beers, and you'll learn how to shoot some guns. But you need your license.
I definitely need to do that. So thanks a lot, guys, for tuning in tonight. Remember, you can check us out on mindyourdamnbusiness.com. Now you can check us all our material out from podcasts all over Canada on bitshoot.com as well. Spotify, Google, you know the drill. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, like button. Check out our shirt. This one's going to be available soon. And thanks a lot, Mark, for coming out. And we'll see you guys next week. Yeah.
Glad to do it anytime, guys.
Check out our partners down south at think-liberty.com. They're always good to us. Be good to them. All right, guys. Till next week. Have a good one.
Thank you, gentlemen. Good night.
Thank you. Have a good one. Awesome.